Chapter 5 on learning disability is long and in-depth. Probably the biggest one is the one I should spend a whole course on, and you're going to just get it on a flyover level here. Talk about the prevalence, assessing causes, educational models, placement, all the things that we've looked at before. Just that this group of students, more than any other, will study, will be in your classroom every day, no matter if you're teaching PE or you're teaching higher level math. This pertains to you. So I'm sorry this one got a little bit longer, a lot to do, a lot to talk about. I said I wish you could have a course just in working with these kids. But you'll have to settle for what I gave you here, and let's take a look at Chapter 5, Learning Disabilities. Chapter 5, Learning Disabilities. And this young man usually has that look of somebody that's diagnosed or having some kind of a learning problem. Obviously, for effect, these are here, but always behind, always struggling. Never really is learning disabilities image with somebody that's enjoying this process. So here's the focus questions. Why is the concept of learning disabilities proven so difficult to define? And we'll have some discussion of that. What characteristics encompass all the students? What factors might account for a huge increase in the prevalence of students identified with learning disabilities since the 70s? And it recently has subsided a little bit, but part of that is that we're now diagnosing these kids with some of the other disabilities that we used to put in this category. Are achievement deficits of most students diagnosed with learning disabilities the result of neurological impairment or poor instruction? And that is really a incriminating piece that they're trying to look at. What can a student's responsiveness to evidence-based instruction reveal about the need for this? How can academic tool skills and what skills are most important to the success of an elementary age student with learning disabilities in the general education classroom and for secondary? So we'll have a look at that. First, the definition. Let me just take you to the textbook first. This is interesting because we did some study on other disabilities, but this one's a little different. It talks about 1950. If you remember, when was the birth of special ed? When was the federal law passed? If you said 1975, you're correct. But the initial special ed really was for these groups, kids with intellectual disabilities, or what we call mental retardation, behavior disorders, those kinds of things. But this group really of learning disabilities was really, they didn't know what to do with them. They're physically intact. In other words, they really had hidden disabilities. You couldn't tell anything was wrong with them by looking at them, and they were just unable to learn those basic skills in school that everybody else was learning. And schools had no programs for these kids, and so their parents often turned to physicians, to doctors, and psychologists to try and figure out why these kids couldn't achieve, why they couldn't learn. And so, understandably, these professionals viewed the children from the vantage points of their respective disciplines and had names for them like this: brain damage, minimal brain dysfunction, neurological impairments, perceptual handicaps, dyslexia, and aphasia to describe them. But the term learning disability was coined by Samuel Kirk in '63. Could you put that in your notes first? Let me bring you back here, and that'll be our number one. Here, number one is Samuel Kirk, 1963. You put that in here so you have that. That's where that term came from. Just a group of parents whose children were experiencing serious difficulties in learning to read, write, spell, solve problems. The parents liked the term, and are that very evening voted to form the Association for Children with Learning Disabilities. And so that was the birth of that. And then today it's called Learning Disabilities Association of America, which I am a member of. LDA, we call it. And it is a powerful advocacy group for people with learning disabilities. In '75, learning disabilities was included as a category in IDEA. Of course, it wasn't called IDEA then, but it was added immediately. Considerable confusion and disagreement exist among professionals and parents, even the most basic question, which are, what is a learning disability? And I'm telling you, still very controversial. In some ways, learning disabilities brought out both the worst and the best that special education that has to offer. Learning disabilities has served as a breeding ground for fads, miracle treatments, and at the same time, some of the most innovative and productive researchers in SPED have devoted their careers to the study and treatment of learning disabilities. Many instructional strategies that were developed for students with learning disabilities have influenced and benefited the entire field of education. So that's a mouthful, and that's exactly what happened. Is once the highly successful researchers started to say, let's look at this not so much on what's wrong with them, but how to accurately serve them. Those same strategies then came into the mainstream for all kids, like RTI and things like that. But this was interesting. A new regime, a diet regime, cures learning disabilities. All those things that come into play. So that was the birth of it in '63. It was added in '75 to the federal law. The LDA started. The learning disability became the advocacy group for people with learning disabilities. What are the definitions? Let me go back to the notes first. Definition is that one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or using language. Okay. One or more basic psychological processes involved in understanding or using language may manifest itself as an imperfect ability. Here is a word that you have to use: imperfect. Remember this thing with Samuel Kirk, like you've been doing. You're going to clearly identify that in the notes for me so I can find it. Red, blue, whatever, you've done a nice job. You may manifest itself in a perfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do math calculations. Includes such conditions as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. And this is the one most people, this is coming to the mainstream now. Most folks, especially in our field of education, are familiar with that term and what it means. And then, of course, there's some disqualifying things. It does not include learning problems that are the result of other disabilities or environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantages. And what's really interesting about that is how do you disqualify those things? Other disabilities you can use, but how do you disqualify if their problems are environmental, cultural, economic disadvantaged? I've been asking that question for 25 years. How do you determine that they're not? And there's a box on the determination thing that you have to mark that says it's not those things. I can clearly mark if it's and eliminate those, but many a times, folks, these looked like factors, but I had no proof, and so I would mark the box. These terms are important here. South Dakota Department of Ed also has their own because they take these federal regs and they adopt them, and this is what South Dakota says. A learning disability is if they do not achieve a commensurate with age and ability in one or more of the areas. And there's this oral language. This is, I'll talk about this later, but it has to be 1.5 standard deviations in achievement, and the difference between achievement and intellectual abilities. Remember, intellectual abilities. What is that? What is that measured with? Their intellectual abilities. We can make that number 2. What do we measure intellectual abilities with? But there's this oral language, listening, comprehension. Think of these two. Oral language, which is speaking, and listening. What's interesting about those two in South Dakota is that you as the SPED teacher, you as the regular classroom teacher, don't really impact those as much. You do, but those will almost exclusively be orchestrated by a speech and language therapist. But this will be your classroom things: written expression, basic reading skills, reading comprehension. So this is like vocab. and then comprehension, math calculations, math reasoning, and I always say this is the story problems. Sometimes this is a killer for kids with learning disabilities. Why? Because often it's connected to reading. Right. So let's go back to the text a second. So here's their definition. It came up there already. This organization here, just like in mental retardation or intellectual disabilities, is kind of the overriding committee here that has a strong influence, that they take a lot of their marching orders from them. The federal definition is just what I read to you up there. These here, disorders such things as brain dysfunction, and it does not include these things. Learning problems that is primary result of visual, hearing, motor disabilities, mental retardation, emotional disturbance, or environmental, cultural, economic disadvantages. All right. So you have to be able to eliminate those. And like I said, when it comes to environmental, cultural, economic disadvantages, how do you eliminate them? How do you clearly, what assessment, how do you, in clear conscience, mark that box? Very challenging thing, but for the most part we do. So it gives you some things that include, some things it doesn't include. So how do we operationalize, and that's a big word in special ed. And on your notes, I would like you to bold that, or some way that you know that I talked about that, is that operationalize. You give that some notation so that you, I better mark this for you. This is number 3, is you are going to somehow notate that more, operationalize. Okay. When using the federal definition to identify students with learning disabilities, most states require 3 criteria. First, a discrepancy between intelligence and achievement. Here it is again, an unexpected difference between general ability and achievement. What does unexpected mean? Well, if somebody has intellectual disabilities, you would assume that there would be a lower achievement. But somebody that comes what we would consider somewhat normal ability, and their achievement is way below, it isn't commensurate with their ability, that's an unexpected difference. Unexpected. I have a couple links here I want to get to. Do you remember this? This is the standard deviations that we said about 70% of people fall within 1 standard deviation above and 1 standard deviation below. And we're saying in South Dakota you have to be 1.5 standard deviations below to qualify, and that's considering here if the IQ of the student was 100. And where it'll get a little tricky is, what if the IQ of the student is 90? Have a 90 IQ or less, or an 80. Then what happens to this? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay. And then here's the unexpected part. Okay, let's just say average. An average student has an IQ of 100. We have a whole bunch here, but just say 100's average, so their achievement tests would have to be an 80 or below. So if they got an 80 on their reading comprehension or their reading fluency assessment, we would still say they have a learning disability. They would have to be 81 wouldn't qualify. So if somebody has a reading fluency score of 78, they qualify. But here's where it gets tricky. Here is I think, the biggest challenge of this, what we call this discrepancy model. What if somebody has a 90 IQ, which is still in the average range, getting towards low average? Now it drops clear to 75. That's low. That's very low. That's a very low score. Okay. Let's go a little farther. Now we get to low average. This is still considered the average range. Now they would score, if they have to have a 70 or below to be considered having a learning disability. What happens traditionally, where this really gets tricky, and it's so nice they've changed this in the last 10 years, is you would see a lot of these kids with 80 IQs that would be achieving in the high 70s. Now, what's the significance of that? Their failure, their success in the classroom would still be extremely challenging if your achievements are in the 70s, yet you don't qualify as a learning disability because your IQ is too low. Versus over here, look at here, just say you were a gifted kid, and we said a gifted starts at 115. 88 is not too hard to be below that then. So if you have higher IQs, this comes more into play. So what we end up over here with these kids in the 80s is just a low-functioning student that really does not meet the criteria of a learning disability. So it's really a failed model, and thank goodness they have changed this up somewhat. But you have to have that severe discrepancy between the student's intellectual ability and academic achievement, and then exclusion. Students' difficulties are not the result of another known condition that can cause learning problems. And that's where you have to check that box I was just talking about. And then a need for special ed. And then it takes you through this here. And this is child's, there are different definitions here. Let me go back to the notes. A student's difficulties are not the result of another condition, and the student shows specific and severe learning problems despite standard educational efforts. And you have to be able to document that of this. Like I say, and this is the one that I think is tricky. So what is this? Comparing the student's score on the IQ test and her score on the achievement test. You compare them like I showed you on the discrepancy model. This. You compare those two like I showed you there. While such a comparison seems simple on the surface, its practice is fraught with problems. The federal government proposed several math formulas for determining that discrepancy. All of the proposed formulas were eventually rejected. Can you imagine rejecting something from the feds? And the final rules and regs of IDEA did not contain specific definitions, formulas of discrepancy. And so what they did, what that means, I know this is shocking, is they bounced it back to the states and said to the states, you determine. This confusion and disagreement show exactly how severe discrepancy should be determined, led to a wide variety of procedures for identifying and classifying it. Recognizing problems inherent in the discrepancy approach to determining eligibility for SPED and the concern for large and growing numbers of children being identified under this category, when Congress authorized IDEA in 2004, it significantly changed the way the states could determine this. When determining whether a child has a learning disability, a local education shall not be required. And this was a huge change that gave me much heartache. And you have to remember, by 2004, when they reauthorized, I was no longer teaching in the public school systems. But this was a huge step, I thought. A local education agency, an LEA, shall not be required to take into consideration whether a child has a severe discrepancy model. A local education agency may use a process that determines if the child responds to scientific or research-based intervention as a part of that. And that is the RTI model, which it goes into here. And I'm telling you, that was the most positive step I'd seen in special ed. Because just what I was explaining, This is why I was explaining it, because I was inundated with these kids in the 80s that were what we would always tell each other, they're overachieving. That if you have an 84, there's no way you should have a 72, but they did. Because, you remember this talk? This is really considered, when you get down here from 75 and below, it's mentally retarded. And so you would say your skill level is the same as somebody that's mentally retarded in reading, math, writing, listening, speaking, even though your IQ is above that. And so, in my opinion, it was really a failed model, and this was a huge step in the right direction. Called response intervention, shifts identification from wait to fail model to one of early identification and prevention. RTI is discussed detailed later in the chapter. So it was a huge step. I'm going to bring you back and ask you to put that here. Here, this would be number 4, I believe. Wait to fail. You put that there and mark it clearly. That was a change. And this exclusion. Students with significant problems are not primarily the result of other conditions that can impede learning, such as lack of opportunity to learn, cultural factors, environmental, English. The word primarily in the definition recognizes that the learning disabilities can coexist. And so that was a big step. In that case, student typically receives services under that other category. But I say this is the one that gives you some heartburn as exclusion. And so I'm going to ask you to do that here too, is put the word, this will be number 5. This is number 4, this is number 5, heartburn. Put right here. That one will give you some heartburn. And then the needs. Students with with learning disabilities show specific and severe learning problems despite standard educational efforts. Okay, and again, they put that in there for a reason. And therefore need specifically designed instruction to meet their unique needs. This criterion is meant to avoid, you knew this was coming, over-identification of children who haven't had the opportunity to learn. This word that we've been waiting for, disproportionate over-identification. Such children should progress satisfactorily as soon as they receive effective instruction and curricular level at appropriate to their skill level. So again, you have to mark this one that they have had standard educational efforts, that they have had normal efforts. And again, folks, I'm saying to you, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you would not mark this box as that has happened. Other than, here, let me give you some wild scenarios. It's some migratory a child of a family of some migrant workers who just hasn't been in school regular enough. Or somebody that's brand new to this country is a first-generation citizen or undocumented citizen or something like that. That may be a case, but that rarely happens. So here's the National Joint Committee on Learning Disabilities. It's composed of representatives from 12 professional organizations concerned with education, treatment, and rights of children and adults with learning disabilities. So that's what happened. They had a whole bunch of different ones. So let's get together and form a National Joint Committee. And then they came up with a list of things about learning disabilities. And their focus wasn't always just children, emergent children. It had more to do with adults, children and adults. Exclusion of adults, learning disabilities can occur across the lifespan. In other words, once there is one, it's there. And sometimes you see, I recently had somebody in my class that wasn't diagnosed as having a learning disability until they were an adult. Then reference to basic process, psychological process. This phrase invites debate on how to teach students with learning disabilities. Inclusion of spelling as a learning disability. Spelling can be subsumed under a written expression. So spelling is not a category. If you go back and look at the notes, that's not a category. That fits under a written expression. Inclusion of obsolete terms, wording, an exclusionary clause. And in response to these problems, the Fed definition, this organization said learning disabilities is a general term that refers to the heterogeneous group of disorders manifested in significant difficulties in acquisition of the same things here. Heterogeneous meaning, of course, different. These disorders are intrinsic in the individual and presumed to be due to the central nervous system's dysfunction and may appear across the lifespan. Problems in self-regulatory behaviors, and this is what shows up so often for you as the teacher. These problems with self-regulatory behaviors. Interaction may exist with learning disabilities, but do not themselves constitute a learning disability. So you get that from them. Let me flip back if you could. Okay. So what are some of the characteristics of a learning disability? Early in the field of history, a task force commissioned to identify this found 99 separate characteristics that were reported of people that had learning disabilities. Inherent danger of this list is to assume, look at each of every child with a learning disability. This danger is especially troublesome with learning disabilities because the category includes children who exhibit a wide range of learning social and emotional problems, which we know doesn't always mean it's a learning disability. They often can come alongside, but doesn't always mean that. More than 500 combinations of characteristics of kids' learning disabilities. Learning disabilities are associated with problems in listening, reasoning, memory, selecting, focusing on relevant stimuli, perception, and processing. So there is just their ballpark figure, keywords here. Perceptual and cognitive processing difficulties are assumed to be underlying causes. Perceptual, cognitive. Following characteristics that students with learning disabilities experience either individual or in combination. And again, this comes right from the beginning. Problems and deficit in written language, underachievement in math, poor social skills, inattention deficits, attention deficits, and hyperactivity behavior problems. So firstly, take us through this reading problem, and that's the number one. Oh, let's talk about this. Local education agency may use a process that determines the child responds to specific research-based interventions as part of this. Remember, it has to have the reading process has to be documented as scientifically based. The responsiveness to intervention approach shifts the identification of learning disabilities from a wait and fail model to one of early intervention, because you start to collect data. You start to track their success or lack of success immediately in kindergarten. What do we know in kindergarten? You're making the sounds, you know all the letters, you know what sound the letters make, and they start to have data on that. That's the definitions. All right. So here's the characteristics. Students with LD experience one or more of this. First of all is the reading problems. 80% of all children identified have reading problems. Difficulty reading by far is the most common characteristic of students with learning disabilities. About 80% of all learning disabilities are referred for SPED because of reading. Children who fail to learn to read by the first grade, this is why I brought this in here, so that this grabs your attention. Children who fail to learn to read by the first grade tend to fall farther and farther behind their peers, not only in reading, but in general academic achievement as well. This is the case for Head Start, preschool, mandatory preschool, mandatory kindergarten, is this statement right here. Evidence suggests that specific reading disability, sometimes called dyslexia, is a persistent deficit and not simply a developmental lag in linguistic or basic reading skills. And here's what Dyslexia Association says. Specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling, decoding disabilities, and poor decoding. Decoding means figuring out academic words or vocabulary words. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive skills. Effective classroom instruction. So that reading is 80%. Here's dyslexia. It gives you that. Now, here's some things I want you to bring in. And I'll give you it. The most severe problems of children with learning disabilities lie at the word level of processing. Let's bring this here. You're going to move this down, and you're going to put number 1 here is that. Word level processing. And a definition. So this is, what number are we on here? 5? 6. This is your number 6 thing, and there's several here. Number 6 is here. So that's 1. And here's 2, a phonological awareness and a phonemic awareness. And both have definitions here. So these 3 things you'll bring into your notes right here. And word level is an inability to accurately and fluently decode single words. Most cognitive limitation of children is dysfunction in the awareness of phonological structure or spoken words. Phonological awareness refers to conscious understanding and knowledge that language is made up of sounds. That's what phonological awareness. That's your second one. And then the most important aspect of phonological awareness are learning to read phonemic awareness, the knowledge that words consist of separate sounds or phonemes, that ability to manipulate these. So those 3 is number 6 in this reading problem. Okay, this is continues. Recent research suggests that children with severe reading disabilities, particularly those who are resistant to interventions effective for a majority of struggling readers, may share a second processing problem in addition to deficits in phonological awareness. Many children and adults with dyslexia show a significant deficit in visual naming speed. So you bring that one in here also. So you have 3 things, and here's the 4th. Visual naming speed. And all this comes down to this, comprehension. Comprehension is the goal of reading, and comprehension lies at the phrase, sentence, paragraph, and story level, not in identifying single words, which is for a long time, that's what we taught people. But if you can only identify words, doesn't mean you can read, because reading takes this phrase, sentence, paragraph, story level to comprehend. But the inability to rapidly identify words impairs comprehension in at least 2 ways. First, faster readers encounter more words and idea units, therefore having the opportunity to comprehend more. Second, assuming that both word recognition and comprehension consume finite cognitive processing resources, a struggling reader who devotes more process resources to identifying words has fewer cognitive processing. So if you're using your skill to identify words, you have fewer left to process the meaning. Can you bring those 2 things in also on comprehension? It clearly identifies 2 things. And I'll make this number 5 on this page, is comprehension, 2 things. Right. Extensive research over the past 35 years has produced more than 2,000 peer-reviewed journal articles about early reading acquisition and reading difficulties. This research has revealed a great deal about the nature of children's reading disability and the kind of interventions most effective in preventing and remediating reading problems. And remember that some of this came into the mainstream instruction, what they found worked well with kids with learning disabilities. Figure 5.1 describes key principles of effective beginning reading instruction consistent with recommended based on a review of that reading group. To learn more about effective beginning reading instruction, see Teaching and Reading Explicit Instruction. And that is probably the most widely accepted one. This is their thing here in 5.1. Let me take you quickly here on explicit instruction. And this is what I've seen done very explicitly. Here it's defined, and then expression is important, examples of explicit instruction, and I have some stuff later that talks about it, but mostly it allows choral review, where you review with the students and they respond in unison to instruction. And of all the things I've seen in reading remediation, this has been the one that I would say is the most successful that I've seen with my own eyes. Okay. So we got all those things on deficit. So now we're going on to math. And I got some things for you from math too. Where did I lose it here? Written language. Is that the next one? Oh yeah, written language. Yep, these were all with reading. Those 5 things with reading, and now written language. Many students with learning disabilities have problems writing and spelling. Students with learning disabilities perform significantly lower than their age-mate peers without disabilities on all written expression tasks, including transition of handwriting, transcription of handwriting, spelling, punctuation, vocabulary, and grammar. Some students, right here in the yellow, some students with learning disabilities are competent readers but struggle mightily with written language. Now, I will say to you, that's rare, but does happen. But it does happen. 5.2 shows a story written by a 10-year-old student with illustration of prehistoric caveman. Sean's oral reading of his story reveals a huge disparity between written and oral language. Let me take you to that. I have it here because I thought it would be interesting to look at that. Here, if you look at this, here's his writing, and on this side is his how he read the story, and then he wrote it. Just take a minute and read through that quickly, and then we'll talk about some observations here. Okay, this reminds me of my Alex when he was, and he still does this some, from the standpoint of this is very phonetically written. He's simply bringing things up that are phonetically how they sound, so he's writing as he would speak. So even though he was able to read it perfectly, when you get to this here he dropped an M into an N. They attained a cousin they had to gather to feast. I mean, so if you go with that, you can kind of figure out some of that. All right. Compounding weak language base that many students with learning disabilities bring to the writing task is an approach of writing process that involves minimal planning effort and metacognition effort. Many students with learning disabilities use a retrieve and write approach, in which they retrieve from immediate memory whatever seems appropriate and write it down. They seldom use the self-regulation and self-assessment strategies of competent writers, setting a goal or plan to guide their writing and organizing ideas, self-addressing and rewriting. As a result, they produce poorly organized composition. Fortunately, teachers are able to help them. So I want you to bring this in, this term, retrieve and write. And this will be our number 7 here, retrieve and write. And again, on all these, I would encourage you, as soon as I say that, to go ahead and stop this, do it, and then come back. That's number 7. Math. Numerical reasoning and calculations pose major problems for many students with learning disabilities. Students with learning disabilities perform lower than typically achieving students on every type of arithmetic problem at every grade level. Sorry, I didn't want to tell it to you that way, but that's the way it is. Deficits in retrieving number facts and solving story problems are particularly evident. The math competence of students with learning disabilities progresses about 1 year for every 2 years of school, and the skills of many children plateau at age 12, 10 to 12. I want you to bring that fact in here to math. This is our number 8. 1 year of progress for 2 years of school plateaus, math skills plateau at 10 or 12. What does that mean? Yeah, algebra is going to be a nightmare. But that's your number 8. And then poor social skills. This is a jarring number. 75% that identified as having a learning disability have social skill deficits. 75%. I have this link for this on the front here.
With Katie Curran and Matt Lauer.
Thank you, Janice. Coming up next, helping kids with... It's hard enough for children with learning disabilities to keep up in school. Social pressures can often
Rick
lead to
Lavoie
additional stress.
is a renowned expert, and what I want you to do is not watch this here, but I have made this link on this page here called Poor Social Skills. You will go to that, and then you will bring that in here about what he has to say. So this will be our number 9. And what does Rick Lavoie say about this? And then, of course, we have some others. This attention deficit and hyperactivity and behavior problems. And this is a harsher one. Low rates of self-esteem, self-efficacy, lower levels of self-efficacy, mood, effort, and hope. Let's take a look at those, which will really be hard. They've studied 152 studies. And that's a paper study. When we say study, we go through and look at the school records. That's how you do a study on this. So 150 studies, and it doesn't. You don't know. You'd have to follow up this from 1996 to know how they did it. But after they did 152 studies, and each study maybe, I don't know how many students' files to look at, but they found that 75% of students with learning disabilities that have these deficits. Poor social skills often lead to, you ready for this? Rejection, low social status, fewer positive interactions with teachers, difficulty making friends, and loneliness, all of which are experienced by many students with learning disabilities and regardless of the classroom placement. And I'm telling you, folks, when I taught middle school, I lived this life with these kids, and they were all poster children for these types of things. First one, poor social skills lead to rejection, and that was a big one, and especially in middle school, nothing worse. Low social status, fewer positive interactions with teachers and with their peers, and then difficulty making friends and loneliness. All of it goes together. These cannot be parched out apart. They fit together. And so many students with learning, regardless of the classroom placement, meaning whether it was in the resource room, self-contained, or regular classroom, these problems persisted all through the different placements. That's what the term placement means, remember? The poor social skills of students with learning disabilities may be due to the ways they interpret social situations. And I firmly believe that to be true. Relative to their own experiences and inability to perceive the nonverbal affective expressions of others. In other words, they can't read the social cues. They can't read those nonverbal things. And I'm telling you, they had a terrible time making friends. They were just something that was abrasive about them. And I thought it was, for a long time, that they were just jaded from such a long history of failure But when you drill down a little farther, I think there was some fundamental deficits in their ability to read social cues. That their social cue development was just as delayed as their academic skills. So they're in 8th grade, and their academic skills are back at about the 3rd grade level. Sometimes it appeared their social skills development was the same. It was at times a real challenge, and I spent enormous amounts of time teaching and talking and trying to model appropriate social skills. Although researchers who studied messages by children on a website for people with learning disabilities, and this is a terrible thing for Heward to put in here, because that's not representative. So apparently some website for people with disabilities, rare instances where children describe positive social relationships. The children overwhelmingly express social difficulties, which I get, but generally, if a website, that's all that's going to come there. This is just saying it goes a little farther. Some students with learning disabilities, however, experience no problems getting along with their peers. For example, this researchers here reported no significant difference in the social metric standing of 46 high school students with learning disabilities and 46 without disabilities. Now, wouldn't you love to see what that was about? If they have, because here's a word, no significant, meaning not one student had problems. Moreover, they discovered that some of the students with learning disabilities enjoyed socially rewarding experience in the exclusive classroom. So very, very, very contradictory here. I would discount this first one because it was on a website for people with disabilities, meaning exclusively that's where they would be herded there, sent there to respond specifically if they were having some kind of problems. And then this other test, this other study, I think is erroneous, that no significant differences. Seems very peculiar to me also. One interpretation of these contradictory findings is that social competence and peer acceptance are not characteristic of learning disabilities. Harsh, listen to this, but are outcomes of the different social climates created by teachers, peers, parents, and others with whom students with learning disabilities interact. Oh, so it's not their fault. We have bad school climates and stuff. So this whole thing that Heward goes off in here, I think he kind of gets himself in the mud up to about his waist, because you can't get back out of here. But saying that, oh, here's the problem. If you're this group up here that's putting on the website that you have no positive interactions, and maybe it's that reason is because our social climates created by our schools, teachers, parents is what's causing that. So do with that what you will. Research have begun to identify types of problem experience learning disabilities who are ranked low in social promote social status, and so that's tough. And then attention, this one really surprises me also. Some students with learning disabilities have a difficulty attending to a task or displaying high rates of hyperactivity. Children who consistently exhibit these problems may be diagnosed with this. You know this term. And that's not learning disability. May be diagnosed with this. But a high degree of comorbidity, and you get to bring that up here because I want to see you do that one, with attention deficit, and this will be number 10, the core word, morbidity. You tell what that is here for attention problems. That's number 10. But here's the part that is jarring to me. A national study examining this of elementary and middle school students with disabilities found that 28% of parents whose children were receiving special ed under the category of learning disabilities reported their children also had ADD, ADHD. That seems very low to me. And I'm going to guess, okay, and they didn't look at the file. They asked parents, and they asked the parent to identify whether the student has ADD and their IEP also. But there'd be a number of kids that have these characteristics, and there would be no reason to have them on the IEP. So this, again, Dr. Heward, come on. This is not good research here at all. Because they asked parents of children with receiving SPED under the category of learning disabilities reported children also having ADHD. So I don't I don't think that's very well done. Then behavior problems. Research have consistently found a higher than usual incidence of behavior problems among students with learning disabilities. A comparative study of more than 600 adolescents with and without learning disabilities found a higher frequency of at-risk behaviors such as smoking, marijuana use, delinquency, acts of aggression, and gambling among youth with learning disabilities. Sorry to break it to you like that, but that's the way it is. They're just higher at risk, do this risk-taking, at-risk behaviors, I'll call them. Although research clearly shows an increase of behavior problems among children with learning disability, the relationship between the students' behavior problems and the academic difficulties are not known. You jump to conclusions there on your own. Why kids with learning disabilities have more behavior problems. In other words, we do not know whether the academic deficits or the behavior problems cause other difficulties or products of the category. It is important to note that many children with disabilities exhibit no behavior problems. I'm glad they at least put that in there. Regardless of this interrelationship of these characteristics, teachers and other caregivers responsible for planning educational programs for students with disabilities need skills for dealing with social and behavior difficulties. Let me take you back here. I want you to put this in here. So here is number 11 right here. And that is, you tell me about these at-risk behaviors, that they're more at risk for smoking, marijuana, delinquency, acts of aggression, gambling than anybody else. So that's number 11. Go do that and then come back. And then one of the harder ones, I think, is this low ratings on self-efficacy. More likely to report low levels of self-efficacy, mood, effort, and hope than their peers. It's not known whether the tendency for negative self-perception is an inherent characteristic or the result of painful history of frustration and disappointment. I think it's the latter. I think they develop it over time because my experiences with younger kids in this do not share this same negative self-perception feelings that they develop over time. I say it's a history of failure leads to this, as it would for you and I. And so that's what this one is now for number 11, or number 12 now, is what causes this. Which of those two things? Cause, C-A-U-S-E. Cause, two things, one of two things, one of two. You put those in here. Okay? Those are characteristics. Go do that. Come back. So what is the defining characteristic of this? And the notes have a nice page on this. The defining characteristic is this: specific and significant achievement deficits in the presence of adequate intelligence. So the intelligence, the IQ, is adequate, but significant achievement deficits. Not slight, but significant. Meaning in South Dakota, 1.5 standard deviations. That's the defining thing right here. 1.5, that if they have 100 IQ, if they have an 80 or below in achievement, that's significant. That's 1.5 standard deviations below. That's what that is. All right. And then a performance gap becomes especially noticeable and handicapping in the middle and secondary grades. And my term is this: sometimes they can fake it until then. And then the last thing, the difficulties experienced by children with learning disabilities, especially those who cannot read at grade level, are substantial and pervasive and usually last across the lifespan. Not always. I've heard instances where I can remember a young man giving a talk one time. They didn't learn to read until he was 21. But for the most part, if this deficit is here, it's across their entire life. They're poor readers and have these learning problems. That is the defining characteristics, these three things. So what's the prevalence? LD, you know this, LD is by far the largest of all SPED groups. 42% of all kids in IEPs receive it in the LD category. And this means school age, which really is 6 to 18. Because our services, special ed services, goes to age 21, but they're often not counted in here. But that accounts for about 4% of the entire population in the school. So as you look at your student body in the school you're teaching at, know that around 4% of them are diagnosed with learning disabilities. Diagnosed, served in that category. Many could have formally have that. Many could have the characteristics of that. Many could have this deal where they're, say for example, this kid right here that has a 90 IQ and it has a high 70 here achievement. Again, I'm going to tell you, this kid's in your class and life is miserable academically for him, but he does not qualify. So that's why this term is a little skewed here. This is only those that are served. And this is a change. Males with outnumber the females now. It's 3 to 1. And then the rising incidence of children with LD led some scholars suggested it may be considered an epidemic. Some contend that too many low achievers have been improperly diagnosed. And so this is where that term over-diagnosis comes from. Too many. Okay. So here's the first thing you're going to bring in is in the 2009-10 school year, nearly 2.5 million students ages 6 to 21 received it under this category. So bring that in here. Let's make this as number 12, I believe. And that thing from the textbook. 2009-10 school year, nearly 2.5 million students aged 6 to 21 had learning disabilities. This other stuff you had. All right. Causes. Brain damage or dysfunction. In most cases, there is no evidence of brain damage, and they have tried and tried to make a connection here, and they can't find it. Neuroimaging research has been reasonably consistent in revealing functional and or structural differences in the left temporal lobe of the brain of individuals with dyslexia. And it's only this one they're talking about because that's the most common kind of disability or learning disability. Educators should refrain from placing too much emphasis on theories linking learning disabilities to brain damage or brain dysfunction. And it doesn't matter if you're serving a kid, if you're serving somebody with this, it doesn't really matter. And then hereditary, there is growing evidence that genetics may account for at least some family links to dyslexia, and I know that to be true from kids I worked with. That for dyslexia, there's a strong link. Then biochemical imbalances. Most professionals give little credence to biochemical imbalances such as significant cause or treatment of a learning disability. Let me just go to the text here and talk about this a little bit. Brain dysfunction, sometimes used by physicians, implies brain by asserting the child's brain does not function properly. Other studies, down here in the yellow, other studies have found that the brain structure of some children with reading disabilities differs slightly than children without. But now with these MRIs, they can look at that in that 3D dimension, take measurements and stuff. So they have a little more capability in that. And then research that holds promise for understanding the neurological base of dyslexia, and other learning disabilities. Points out, however, not yet know to what extent the brain's neutral networks are affected by experiences and vice versa. And I think this is more than we know, is the child experiences, both positive and negative. Let's talk about that later. Thus, do we not know whether biological factors associated with learning disabilities contribute to learning problems, are the product of unstimulating environment or a combination of the two. Yikes. However, growing evidence indicates that intensive remedial reading instruction reduces differences in the way that the brains of children with reading disabilities and those without are. Here's another one, alphabetic principle. That's what we're coming here. I forget what this is under. Brain damage dysfunction. I think this is number 13. Alphabetic principle, and the definition right there. Okay. And hereditary, said, have a slightly greater than normal likelihood of having reading problems. Again, is it the chicken or egg? When we get to environment, it indicates that genetics may account for at least some of it. Also possible chromosomical things. And maybe it's the lack of reading and nurturing vocabulary in the home. Not supposed to talk about that. And a biochemical imbalance, again, it's not real conclusive about that. And then this is the one again, get ready to squirm in your chair a little bit. Environmental factors, virtually impossible to document as primary cause of learning disabilities. Environmental factors, as I've been whining about the whole lecture, particularly impoverished living conditions early in the child's life and a limited exposure to highly effective instruction in school probably contribute to learning problems experienced by many children who receive special ed. The tendency for learning disabilities to run in families also suggests a correlation. The tendency of learning disability between environmental influences on child's early development and subsequent achievement in school. Evidence for this relationship can be found in longitudinal studies, meaning over a long period of time. Research such as conducted by Hart and Risley, who found that infants and toddlers who received infrequent communication exchanges with their parents were more likely to show deficits in vocabulary, language use, and intellectual development. So that is the basis also. That's the basis for reading to the babies. Even in uterine, you talk about that. You don't hear about it as much anymore, but when we were having our babies, read to them in uterine because reading to them gives them this. Gives them vocabulary. And when they have vocabulary, that turns into language and reading and intellectual developments. Many special educators today believe that Engelman in 77 was correct when he claimed that more than 35 years ago, the vast majority of children are labeled learning disabled exhibit a disability not because of anything wrong with their perception, synapses, or memory. Get this. He claimed because they were mistaught. So we go back to that it's not really environment, you're not teaching them correctly. I don't know, guys. I just see in my babies, the more experiences they have, the more conversations, the more in-depth things that you take them into, it just expands their brain and their world and stuff. So I think there's more to this. It's just so politically incorrect that nobody's dumb enough to dive into this and really study this because it's like, I don't know. I got to be careful here, but it's like any conversation. If you're going to be attacked for being politically incorrect, you just don't do it. You just don't study it. And if you do study it, you don't ever release it. Whether it's against different minority groups or against women or people with disabilities, if it's going to be politically incorrect, you just leave it alone. And I think part of the sin of our world today is the defense of political correctness. And this is one of them, because I think it's a fact here. But they don't ask me. They just write it in the book, and I yap about it. So although the relationship of this effective instruction learning is not clear, a great deal of evidence shows that many students' learning problems can be remediated by heavy doses of intensive, systematic instruction. And that's you. It would be naive, however, to think that the achievement problems of all children with learning disabilities are caused entirely by inadequate instruction. Thank you. Nevertheless, from an educational perspective, intensive instruction is best. So then let's talk about identification and assessment, how we're going to identify them and assess them. Here's those factors we just talked about. Well, first you would use a standardized intelligence achievement test to measure the discrepancy between achievement and general. So what is standardized? Let me come back here And here's a whole list of different standardized tests. Now, the one that I worked with the most, let me see here. Would be this one, like the Sanford achievement tests. The one most common that Sioux Falls District used when I was there was the Woodcock-Johnson test. Okay. All right. And then a curriculum-based measurement is used to measure the growth of a student's proficiency in core skills that contribute to success in school. So curriculum is exactly that. It's what they're studying in school, right, in the curriculum. And then a direct daily measurement used for observing and recording a student's performance on a specific skill each time it's taught. And then a criterion reference like a driver's test used to compare a child's score with a predetermined criteria. Like a driver's test, you pass or fail. I believe it's 80%. And if you don't pass that, if you don't hit that, it's fail. You have to redo. Let me give you a little what this looks like, this direct daily measurement. Like this, a fluency passage, you would have them practice read a fluency passage, and then you'd score it. And it tells you how to score, like skipped words, mispronounced words, there's errors, things like that. So, and you do that daily. They're doing it daily to see if they're making progress. And that's what that's about. Okay, so let's look at this. Here's curriculum-based. All right. It's a formative evaluation. So here's what I'm going to ask you to come in here and curriculum-based and put these in here. The formative evaluation and summative evaluation. What do those mean? I believe we are at number 14. Two definitions here. That is this one, the formative evaluation and summative. And this is that provides information on student learning instruction takes over time. By contrast, results of summative cannot be used to inform instruction because it's conducted at the end when everything's complete. So a more common one is formative, that you're constantly evaluating their progress, where summative is a little bit more typical now that we teach the whole chapter. We teach 3 chapters, then have a test over it. That would be more of a summative. And that's not useful. That's the difference between formative and summative. It's down here in the yellow. In addition to being valid and reliable, curriculum-based measurements should be easy to administer, cost and time efficient, and perhaps most important, sensitive to small incremental changes in student performance over time. One set of this is the dynamic indicators known as DIBELS. So you bring this in because you got to know about DIBELS. Again, this is number 15, DIBELS. That's not spelled right, but this is the one that's most common to determine progress, is DIBELS. And DIBELS was developed by an efficient indicator of key reading skills, early identification of children. And this is for young kids at risk of reading difficulties, and assess the effects of intervention designed to prevent such failures. DIBELS consists of a set of 1-minute fluency measures used to regularly monitor and develop their pre-reading and early reading skills. So right there, that's what you got to know about DIBELS. Consists of 1-minute fluency measures. So 1-minute timings. Research has demonstrated that children who meet or exceed the benchmark goal of each of these are likely to become proficient readers. Most recent version of DIBELS consists of 6 composite scores, and you don't need to bring these in. And I assure you, at DSU, you'll be studying DIBELS as part of your reading methods course. All right, that's all about DIBELS. And the next one is direct daily measurement, and I showed you a thing about that, a little bit like DIBELS. And then we get into this response to intervention. Let me just go back to the notes for that, if you would. Here's the basic premise of RTI, and again, hopefully in the readings methods class, whatever one you're in, they will spend some extensive time on RTI, but it's measuring for low achievement students' responses to increasing intensive, scientifically validated. Remember, I've talked about this many times, that you have to have that term in there. Whether a child struggles to learn are the result of poor or insufficient instruction or a disability for which the education is needed. So if we know, reason this being, if we know without a doubt that it's a valid, solid reading instruction method, and they still don't progress, then we can use this to determine that they have some kind of a disability. So the two functions of this is to screen and identify and prevent. Prevent them from falling farther behind, but mostly in special ed world to screen and identify them. And by doing these regular measurements, and often the DIBELS comes in here, that their screening method here is DIBELS, where you do the 1 minute timings daily. And trustworthiness depends on this, the consistent, rigorous implementation of research interventions and accurate, reliable, easy-to-use measures for monitoring student progress. And again, like I said, this is the DIBELS. I can't remember how to spell that, DIBELS. It is DIBELS. So those two things, what it depends on, and then there's the levels. But from that, you would go this. So there's primary intervention, tier 1, and this is across the whole system of reading. In general ed, primary prevention is provided to all students in the form of evidence-based curriculum instruction. And we're doing this constant 1 minute timings, 1 minute of the DIBELS, to determine who's progressing. And if they're falling behind, if we know on a daily basis right away they're falling behind, then we can go to this tier 2, who are struggling in the general ed program receive an intensive fixed duration trial of small group supplemental instruction. So they spend extra time studying reading and some different methods. And meantime, all through this tier 2, we continue to do 1 minute timings with the DIBELS. And then if this doesn't seem to help them, we would jump to tier 3. And most RTIs, tier 3 is special ed. And even in special ed now, we may change our approach completely, but we would continue to do 1 minute timings in the DIBELS. So benefits and goals: earlier identification of students using a problem solving instead of wait to fail. Then reduction in the number of students referred. And remember, we talked about that. You're always after that, how to reduce the number referred, and reduction over identification of this. Remember, we talked about that. This is a reason I think that the number of learning disabilities is going down a little bit too, because of this model. Provision of more instructionally useful data than most. Useful data from this, specifically from that DIBELS. Methods of assessment. Increased likelihood that students are exposed to high quality instruction in the general classroom by stipulating that schools used evidence-based instruction and routinely monitor it. And what's the monitoring? How do they monitor progress here? This would be, what is this, about number 14, 15? This is number 15, I believe, here. What is that? What would be routinely monitor the progress of all students? How would they do that? That's number 15. Mark that 15 when you put it in there. Go. Service to all students with achievement problems, so that only those students who fail to respond to multiple levels of intervention are considered learning disabled. And so I didn't understand this when it first came on the scene about 10 years ago, but I've become a believer when I see the data that they can use to show this. So the text again has some other things that may show this better. Here's that takes you through those levels, but here this is interesting too, where they show. I think there was a better one here. where they look at the different instructional models. So tier 1, when everybody else is doing, here's how slow the progress is going at the beginning of the year. And it's just not progressing like it should. So they switch it up to tier 2, meaning let's say one of the interventions may be we're going to do reading instruction twice a week or twice a day instead of once. And all of a sudden, just with that intervention, the progress takes off. That's the idea behind the RTI, and we know daily because we're monitoring it with DIBELS. All right, and so here's another one that may be not as successful, that we do this screening after 8 weeks, and we go to tier 2 and still no progress. And then that would be the referral to special ed, where you would look for even more intense type things. So then we get into educational approaches, and I want to go back to the notes for that. First, explicit instruction. And the text doesn't follow this, but I wanted you to have this. And this kind of goes along with DIBELS also, because it's a way you would use those monitorings. Sufficient range of examples to illustrate that concept. And then provide models of proficient performance. In other words, you're demonstrating for them. You're modeling for them proficient performance. Not always a part of instruction, of solid instruction. But you have provide models of proficient performance. You have students explain how and why they make decisions, and provide frequent positive feedback student performance. And DIBELS can do that also. Then adequate practice opportunities. Explicit instruction. And then there's this content enhancements, has these things. Guided notes, graphic organizers, visuals displays, and this will be your number 16, is you give me a little bit what each of those things are and what they're used for. Bring that up. Here's the content enhancement thing here. Graphic organizers, what they are, note-taking strategies, and guided notes. Visual displays, mnemonics. Okay, there's your mnemonics. You bring all that in, what those are and what they have to do with this. And learning strategies. And I want you to bring some in with that about the effects of learning strategies. And so this would be number 17. What learning strategies has to do with this. Go do those. It's a thing I clipped that says what they asked 10 most things. I forget how many teachers they asked for this, but they all were supposed to. The number one they wanted students to be able to do to be in the regular classroom is follow directions in class. And I would concur. That would be a huge one. And then they have kind of a downward of it. Some studies have reported better learning outcomes for students with learning disabilities in inclusive general classrooms than in pullouts things. So what are those placements? Well, the first, we've talked about general ed classroom in 0809, 62%. And remember how we arrive at that number is we add up those minutes and see if it's below. The number of minutes are away from regular ed peers is below 20%. If there's less than 20% away, then they're considered this. Even though they're probably going to the pullout, to the resource room, they'd still be considered general classroom. So it's I think, kind of misleading. Reach on the academic achievement of students with LD inclusive classroom is mixed. Then the second one, so this is one, and then the second one, consultant teacher, provides support to the general educators who work directly with students with learning disabilities. And sometimes that's you working with the regular, if you're the special ed teacher. Where you would have this, so you'd have several teachers you'd work with. And most consultant teachers have little direct contact with students. And so you're starting to see this more than when I was teaching. And then the one that you'd be familiar with as a special ed teacher is the resource room. Specifically staffed and equipped with students with LD come for one or several periods during the day to receive individualized instruction. And I would say less is more here. Resource teacher works closely with general educator to suggest a plan of each student's program. So not only they have direct contact with student, but also with teacher. In 0809, 28% were served. And again, this is based on minutes. So my suspicion is a much higher number come to the resource room part of the day, but because of the minutes thing, qualifications, because we talked about 2,000 minutes in a week, that if you'd have to be 400 minutes at least a week away from peers. So if you were 300 divided by 60 minutes an hour, that would be 5 hours. That would be an hour a day. You could be in here 1 hour a day in the resource room and still be considered regular classroom. So that's why I think that's a little misleading, this number, but that's what they will use here. Then separate classroom, responsible for all education programming to 8 to 12 students, 8%. And often, and again, this is my perception, this has to do with behavior. That's the only reason I can think of they'd be in the separate classroom is behavior. Let's go back to the textbook and see if they have any more insight on that. Here it said 36 studies examining self-concept that, contrary to the stigmatization perspective placed in general classrooms, did not overall have higher self-concepts. That's really unbelievable they would do that. Let me just hit you with that again, what that means. Embaum conducted meta-analysis of 36 cases examining self-concept of students with learning disabilities in different placements and concluded that contrary to the stigmatization perspective, students with LD placed in general classrooms did not overall have higher self-concepts than students placed in either part-time or full-time classrooms. And that really, in my opinion, flies in the face of the least restrictive environment inclusion, because that's what we told each other, that if they were in there, they'd have better self-concepts. And this person has the audacity and courage to do study and bring this out. And it goes on and tries to disqualify him a little bit. Edelbaum properly noted that while no one placement is preferable in terms of self-concept for all students, individual students may be profoundly affected by a placement that jeopardizes their self-esteem, and that when making placement decisions for a child, that should guard against presumptions about the benefit or detriment of placements. And that's really contrary. That was done in 2002. That's really contrary the way I was trained, because that was one of the politically incorrect things. You were never supposed to say it out loud. You never said that was the case, because it was everything was built on the assumption that they'd be much happier in the regular classroom. And I knew personally, working with my students, that was not the case. But everything you read made this long case of putting all the kids in the regular classroom you possibly could. Previous section described enhancing the general curriculum help promote the success of students. Special educators can facilitate success in the classroom by teaching them behaviors that are valued. Okay. Then the consultant teacher, it talks what they do, and the resource room. Some advantage of the resource room model are students do not lose their identity. General classroom, peer group, students can receive and identify individual instruction, be responsible. Flexibility schedule allows the resource room to serve a fairly large number of students. Some disadvantages of the resource room are require students to spend time traveling between classrooms, may result in inconsistent instructional strategies. And so I'm going to ask you to very briefly bring those in, the advantages and disadvantages of the resource room. Advantage and disadvantage. And this is number, what number are we on here? 18. Number 18 here. What are the advantages and disadvantages? I put it for the regular classroom, but I meant here. Oh, here. Yeah, advantages and disadvantages of that. And it comes from right here on page 189. And a separate classroom. And here's kind of a closing thing. Should all be in the general classroom. And that's where you're going to end as 18, is you're going to make a statement about this question right here. And we're going to call this 19. All be irregular. All right. So there, Chapter 5, Learning Disabilities, 19 inputs of yours.